This is brought to you by Forethought, building AI agents for every customer moment.
Great. Cool. Bonnie, Thomas, thank you so much for being here. Yeah, I wanted to start just like reviewing sort of the optimistic case here, or from what you've seen from what generative AI has produced, where do you think we've seen the most like novel discoveries? Or like to what extent has artificial intelligence today produced something novel?
Tough question, huh?
Yeah, so I think, I guess I'll start with, I'm Bonnie Kruft. I lead a team called AI for Science at Microsoft, and we're really all about AI for scientific discovery, and especially that around molecules and materials. So I think we're very early days, but we've already seen scientists using AI to ask some of the most challenging questions, going after problems that scientists have been trying to solve for centuries. AlphaFold is a good example of a century-old problem that scientists have been trying to solve for a very long time. And AI was able to find a way to predict the structure of a protein.
Yeah.
But that's, of course, not the end of the story, because proteins are not static. Proteins are dynamic. So at Microsoft, we're building a model that can then predict the structural conformations and ensembles of those proteins. And then that can help us to drive new target discovery. There are also lots of other grand challenges within science that we can use AI to apply to.
Right.
So just last week, we published a paper on deep learning for density functional theory. So density functional theory is a way of understanding the behavior of a molecule. And if you can do that exactly, you can predict the behavior of that molecule. But people have been trying for decades to try to find the exact functional that would give you chemical accuracy so you could do that simulation in silico. And so lots of people have been working on this. So we just published a paper that shows that we can use deep learning to learn the exchange correlation functional of density functional theory. And that would allow us to then get closer to chemical accuracy of understanding what a molecule can do. And so that all goes into scientists challenging, going after
the hard, long
problems.
process of science. I mean, I guess to me, some of the examples, you said protein folding is one. I mean, there's this sort of Go example where Go is able to play a different strategy than humans have developed. There's some of these math proofs. Thomas, I know, and we're gonna sort of engage with your whole essay on this, but the specific point, like, do you see those two cases, the AlphaGo and some of the proof work in math, as meeting your novelty bar, or are there still sort of derivative findings?
No, yeah, and that's why I'm sometimes even labeled as a skeptic, which I found very surprising because I'm extremely optimistic about AI. But I think the barrier, I think with Bonnie and also with you, Eric, we share this background of having been in a creative field, so having to create as daily. So for us, it was create as a scientist, invent new things. For you, it was create as a writer. So we kind of have a really high bar, I think, for this kind of thing. And if you look at the examples right now, and AlphaGo is one, and what Bonnie was talking about, like, which is training models for DFT, these are extremely interesting models. But I would say there's two things that are very frustrating, in a way. The first thing is these are models that are actually not Gen AI, so they don't really come with new theory. They don't generate. AlphaGo can help you predict properties, right? But this is not like Gen AI. It's not like generating examples of new proteins. Huh? The DFT models. I mean, AlphaGo is the same, right? You can explore the field of possibility, but it's not really inventing a new way to play. And so what I would like to see really now is, and that's what I was kind of calling for in this essay I published earlier this year, which is model that would really invent new thing. And by this real act of creativity, what I mean is actually ask a question. Usually, it's come down to this. A lot of what we see right now is, for instance, models that are very good at math, but how we use them is we give them a theorem where we know there is a proof.
Right.
So these are right now, if you take the latest example like frontier math or this type of thing, these are now...
We're sort of the geniuses saying, look here, wreck them.
These problems are extremely challenging. They're written by PhD students or even like graduate people, but they really are problems. We know there is an answer, right? But in most of the case, in most of very interesting theory in science, or in most of an interesting act of creation, you're tasked with exploring something you don't know if there is an answer, right? So the main question is, what question do you want to ask in R? What do you want to start exploring to see if there will be something interesting? And these models are very bad at that nowadays, I think.
So, I mean, I think we're going to get into more like the limits of the creative thinking of the models. It feels like in drug discovery and some other fields, there's this potential that, there's going to be some sort of low-lying fruit, basically. That there are findings that we have this new technology, like all of a sudden we're going to sort of harvest a bunch of answers for the next decade or something, and then maybe it'll be like, oh, we got everything that's easy and it needs to be novel. Is that how you see the world? Like that there is this sort of like harvesting with the approach we have, or you think without some major advancement in how generative AI thinks, we're still going to be sort of limited in drug discovery specifically?
I think one of the challenges that scientists have, I guess humans in general, is we like to work where it's comfortable. We like to search within the space that we already know really well. I know how these molecules work. I know how it binds to these certain targets. I know how to go into a lab and make it because I'm familiar with these reactions. And I think a lot of drug discovery has run into this problem time and time again, where they're not able to get a molecule all the way through to the clinic because they're kind of stuck in that one area. So one thing,
and partially because these labs are experts in one thing, and they're like, okay, this is our hammer, we apply it to everything.
You've got human intuition that's being built into this. So I think if we were to use, to Thomas's point, if we're used to use AI to keep doing that same process over and over and over again, all we're going to do is find the same molecules that we've always been looking for, that we've always been finding. So we have to somehow move that. We need to move the target slightly. We need to move the search space to a different area. And Gen AI can help us do that because it's looking at a broader space.
It can do so much at once. We're so free. Instead of saying, oh, we're just here, it's like, oh, maybe every time we consider all these different possibilities.
Yes, exactly. So we can, instead of just looking in one little area, we can look in a different area of molecular discovery.
Yeah. So Thomas, you wrote this great essay, basically, asking the question of, will AI produce a Nobel Prize? Will it create an Einstein? Like, what was your conclusion there? How optimistic or not are you about the ability of the current paradigm to produce a true revolutionary idea?
Yeah, I'm not super optimistic on this right now. Yeah.
Not optimistic. You almost whispered it.
That's maybe the.
You're like, this isn't the crowd to admit it.
In most panels, I'm usually the optimist because I think there's a lot of great stuff you can do with AI. And probably you got the idea right here, which is you have two things with AI. So you have the assistant that's really getting amazing, and I think training DFT models, training AlphaFold, these are amazing assistants, and they will definitely lead to some interesting discovery. But like we were discussing yesterday, where we started to talk about this panel, this discovery will come still from this spark of creativity of a human saying, oh, I'm going to use AlphaFold to explore these proteins, and that will be the thing, and then AlphaFold helps you find how it works. And then you have the other thing, which is taking this trillion parameters model and ask them, invent something now, invent something new. We want to travel faster than light. How should we do, right? If you ask that to ChatGPT, nowadays the answer you get are pretty bad. Even though it was trained a lot of sci-fi, so it can give you a lot of...
I've had the experience, we sort of get into the creativity of some of our work. I'm reporting, I've asked, the ChatGPT, like, come up with some scoops, right? And at first, especially when the models come out, I'll get very excited because it'll be like, it sounds like a scoop, it's like Sequoia, has CalPERS money in this filing, but then you look through and it sort of like has made up a lot of things. I feel like it really ends up hallucinating on this sort of like, it knows what it looks like maybe to deliver me a scoop, but it doesn't, it abandons the substance. I have seen it like dig through like Amazon filings to find some Anthropic investment. I think Reuters had written about it, but ChatGPT was trying to argue to me that it distilled two different pools of money that hadn't been written about in the press. But my experience sort of in the edge of, I guess, my field has been hallucinating. But your barrier isn't just like hallucinations. It's also this problem of like, AI is fundamentally trained to like follow the rules. Or can you talk about that piece?
I think there is two problems. I mean, the first one is how we pre-training, to be honest, which is we pre-training to predict the most probable next token, right? So it will always try to predict the most probable token given all the training data. And the problem is most of this training data, I mean, a real scientific breakthrough, if you think about Copernicus, Einstein, I'm a bit biased towards physics, but there's probably the same. If you take CRISPR as well, is you take something people have known for a long time, like CRISPR that was used, as part of the immune system, and you say, maybe we could use that for something totally different. Or you take a theory that people have known for a long time, like the sun is orbiting around the Earth, and you say, maybe this could be all wrong. So you have this thing that you must put a lot of weight on something that's very improbable given your training data. So that's hard. And the way humans do that is they found a very small signal that they really believe in. So Einstein, for instance, there is a couple of experiments that were indicating at this time that maybe the speed of light was the constant. But it was very counter to all, even today, right? I think a lot of people still don't really get the intuition that the speed of light is always constant. So if you go super fast and you shoot a ray of light, it will not go faster.
Right.
It will stay like this. So you need to believe in this very small signal enough to kind of overcome all the back. And so the only way we can get that is in a way to try to, there is one possibility which is just, and that's I think the hope of Anthropic or this type of company who work on science and AI, which is maybe just scaling the model enough will make it sensitive to this very small signal.
Right.
I'm not sure, I'm not convinced about that. But I still think model and Gen AI and LLM will be a part of the thing. But I think we need like some post-training way to actually make them much more creative or sensitive to these small signals.
Maybe a little optimism. Like where do you think over the next like 5 to 10 years we might see sort of discovery or novelty in your field?
I mean, I certainly think that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll start to see novel drug candidates going through phase 3 clinical trials. We'll see new novel materials being discovered and built and put into the ecosystem. I think that we'll find new discoveries. But to Thomas's point, I mean, I think I am a little bit more optimistic, but doesn't it come down to the use case, right? So are we relying on AI to find the signal, or can we rely on ourselves as a scientist to find that signal and use AI as a tool to help point us in the right direction, to help us find those new molecules and materials?
I feel like we're also going to enter like a hysterical period of credit taking, where like humans are like, oh, well, AI produced unlimited things, and like I noticed that one, and that seemed like a good result. So like, should I get the credit, or AI is throwing a bunch of shit at the wall and gets credit for the good ones and no blame for the bad ones? So it'll be interesting, sort of the war of scientists almost wanting to say, no, that was sort of my finding using AI, versus the AI industry potentially wanting to say, we have let the machine find something on its own.
Yeah. Still just the fact of catalyzing this way, like 10x or 100x or 1000x, like how fast a scientist or researcher can go from the beginning of an idea to, like some good hints that it's a good idea. Right. It's amazing. Just to take AlphaFold, before that you had to find a way to crystallize this protein to be able to see how they were folding. That was like a full PhD just to find a way to crystallize this and see how they were orientated. Now you just put that in AlphaFold, you say, okay, how is the protein looking? And poof, you get the result. So you jump 3 years faster, right? And then if it doesn't look good, you move to the next proteins. So I think this is going to live in a way. It will still be very human-driven, like you say. Like human will say, take a look at this. Right. But then in a kind of a matter of days, you will actually do the equivalent of previously a PhD of exploring, how this component or protein or material is actually behaving.
I wanted to talk a little bit about open science and open source. I mean, it does sort of feel like we're entering this world where everybody's discovered how valuable their research is, so you need to hold it back. Obviously, you're a very open source company, but Bonnie, even some of your work you're trying to sort of keep out in the open. How do you weigh the trade-offs and what you guys make public versus sort of keep for yourselves?
Yeah, for us, grounding our models in the real world is extremely important. If we're to build a model and only keep it behind closed doors, how would we ever build trust with the scientific community? So for us, I think it's incredibly important that we make it available to scientists, that we build the community, that we get the feedback, that we iterate and improve on that. So open sourcing is a big part of our strategy.
And then you're still able to like trademark approaches and keep IP around what you discover?
Exactly, and we can also think about future versions that might have some proprietary element to it, have some type of acceleration or speed up to it that we can then put within a commercial platform offering. But I think initially to gain that trust with scientists and to really understand how well it's working, we have to put it out there. It needs to be validated, it needs to be experimented with. If we have a Gen AI model that gives us new novel material, can someone go and make that in the lab? So we also look to partner with organizations to help us to do that too.
What's the read from Hugging Face right now? I mean, do you agree with there has been somewhat of a there's excitement around open source, so everything in AI is sort of exploding, but clearly there are a lot of companies that sort of understand or believe that they need to keep things closed, or what's sort of the trend line you're seeing in open source relative to the overall growth of AI?
So I think it changed a lot over the past years. There were definitely moments where everything looked like they would be closed. And like, for instance, when GPT-3 came out, and then you had all like Cohere, AI21, most of these platforms were starting as closed source platform. And then you had a big trend of open source. I think right now in 2025, we're kind of in a balanced world where basically people expect to have both closed and open source, just like operating systems. You have very exciting recent move, like say OpenAI is talking about open sourcing a model. I would say at some point we'll have most of the big labs will have open source and closed source model. And usually you have, just like Bonnie was saying, you have like this kind of frontier closed source model. And then just a little bit beyond, you have the open source model with all the advantages. I mean, in particular, if you're in university, if you're in like a hobbyist, or if you're someone who actually not in a big company, you probably start with the open source free version, cheap version. You can host it, you can tweak it if you're a researcher want to explore. And then at some point, if you really need to push the performance, you can use closed source.
Do you have a read on the OpenAI open source model? I think they delayed it a little. Like,
it's going to come soon.
Coming soon?
Yeah, I think it's very nice. And they take that in very positive ways. So they did a serious consultation with people, what is needed. I think they learned a lot. It was very interesting. They learned that also people like also small models that can run quite fast and cheap. And they were like, oh, yeah, not everyone has a Stargate basically to power their data center. So I'm personally very excited about that. I think it's great. We just need to convince Anthropic, and then basically every lab will have their open source.
Is Anthropic the resistor right now, or?
I think after OpenAI's will have open source their model, there will be the last frontier lab which doesn't have like a brand of open source model. So.
A good gauntlet, and we've been sort of orbiting Dario's Machines of Loving Grace anyway, which was the very optimistic case for scientific discovery. So yeah, interesting. But I mean, the flip side of open source is just worry that it'll, you can't control it. And that if you're sort of the company that's responsible and testing everything, it seems somewhat antithetical to their model to open source.
I think in the very grand scheme of things, if you believe, and I guess everyone in this room believe that AI is really this fundamental technology, building blocks, I think it has to be open source. Just like if we take the science thing, I don't have to pay someone to learn about quantum physics. I can just open a book and read about it. We should have the same about intelligence. I shouldn't have to pay someone to learn about intelligence. I should be able to open a book and read, how do we make intelligence machine? And the book should say, hey, you train a model like that and that and that. That's my deep belief.
Bonnie, last question, hopefully not too hard. But if you were people are always looking for advice on like new ideas, what they should do. You're sort of on the vanguard. I don't know if you were to suggest some sort of, I mean, you can't, maybe not a fully formed company, but areas where you think people should really be spending time right now. Where are you excited for people to do some work?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess my whole world is about scientific discovery. So finding one of those grand challenges that haven't been solved and building around that. So just finding that opportunity to go after something
Aiming big.
Yeah. Aim big.
Great.
Ambition.
All right, Bonnie and Thomas, thank you so much for starting the day off.